All right, so today we're going to dive deep into this thing that seems to be on everyone's mind these days.
Yeah.
The whole U.S. and Europe thing, and especially with the war in Ukraine.
Right.
You've given us a really interesting mix of stuff to go through,
Yeah.
news articles, opinions from experts, even like potential timelines.
Oh,
It's kind of crazy.
it is.
They all kind of point to some serious anxieties, but also some interesting like opportunities for Europe.
It's like we're at this point where things are shifting.
Yeah.
Like global power.
Yeah.
Looking at these sources, it feels like we're really moving away from how things have been done since the Cold War.
Yeah, it's wild, right? Like, think about it. There was this one U.S. official who just, like, made this offhand comment.
Oh, yeah.
And it basically just threw, like, 80 years of, transatlantic relations, like, right out the window.
Wow.
And get this, some European countries are actually, like, seriously thinking about sending troops into Ukraine.
That's a big deal.
Right.
It really shows you how worried Europe is right now.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, let's try to, like, unpack this a bit.
Okay.
It seems like, from what we've got here, Trump's foreign policy is basically him turning away from Europe.
Uh-huh.
He seems to be way more into like going straight to Russia instead of working with his European allies.
Yeah, this is a really big change from how the U.S. has always acted.
Right.
They've always been the main protector for Europe, especially through NATO.
Right.
And this isn't just about style, it's changing everything, alliances, strategies for defense.
Yeah, and some European leaders are not holding back at all.
Oh, no.
Katja Kallas, the EU foreign policy chief,
Yeah.
She basically just straight up called it appeasement of Russia.
Though using a word like appeasement is a big deal.
Right.
Especially for Europe, makes everyone think about the 1930s.
Oh, yeah.
When they tried to, calm Hitler down, and it just ended up being a disaster.
Right.
So what Callas is saying is basically the U.S. is making the same mistakes all over again.
Yeah.
Emboldening this aggressor and risking a bigger conflict.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy comparison.
Yeah.
No wonder European countries are feeling a bit on edge.
Totally. They've depended on the U.S. to protect them for so long.
Mm-hmm.
They've built their whole defense around it.
Right.
And now they're kind of scrambling,
Yeah.
rethinking everything. Some of them are like, hey, maybe this is our chance to step up.
Yeah.
Europe needs to take care of its own security.
Yeah, the reactions have been all over the place, haven't they?
Yeah.
Some countries like Poland seem totally caught off guard.
Oh, yeah.
While others like France, they're like, hey, strategic autonomy.
Right. Strategic autonomy isn't just some idea.
Right.
It's turning into a plan. France is seriously thinking about sending troops to those parts of Ukraine where there's no fighting.
Wow.
That's a big sign that they're ready to act without the U.S.
Yeah, that's a huge shift from always relying on NATO.
Yeah.
It could be like the beginning of a whole new European defense policy.
Totally, once it's more assertive and independent.
For sure. Think about what that could mean.
I know, right?
More European military spending, them working together to develop new weapons.
Yep.
Maybe even having their own EU army that doesn't need NATO.
It would change everything about European security.
It's like we're watching a whole new chapter unfold.
Yeah, and there's so many interesting players.
I know, right?
It's like a political thriller.
Yeah.
Trump's doing his own thing. Putin's testing the waters. Zelensky's just trying to keep Ukraine together.
Right.
And then you got all these European leaders trying to figure out what to do next.
It's crazy how this one change in U.S. policy has caused such a huge chain reaction.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, every country has its own history with this.
Right.
France, for example, they've always had this rivalry with Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So they see this as like a threat to their very existence.
Right.
And they're pushing for a strong European response.
Yeah.
But then you have Germany, they're kind of hesitant.
Right.
They're so tied to Russia economically, and they're still dealing with their past, not wanting to use their military.
It's complicated.
It is.
And then there are the Baltic states. They're right next to Russia.
Literally on their doorstep.
They're pushing for action now.
Yeah.
Like, bolster European defenses, bring Ukraine into the EU ASAP?
It makes sense that they're the most vocal.
Right.
They're the ones feeling the heat.
Exactly. And that sense of urgency, it's in all of our sources.
Definitely.
But it shows just how hard it is for Europe to, agree on one response.
Oh, yeah.
Every country has their own agenda,
Their own interests, their own strategies.
It makes it tough to show a united front.
Totally. That tension within Europe, it's a big theme in everything we've got.
For sure. But even with all those different views, there's one thing they all seem to agree on.
What's that?
They're all worried about what this means for Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
They're stuck right in the middle of this whole power struggle.
Ukraine's the flashpoint,
Right.
Any peace deal that's just between the U.S. and Russia could leave Ukraine in a really bad spot.
Yeah, there's a real fear that they'll get sacrificed.
Yeah.
Just so the big guys can make a deal.
Totally. Callas was really clear about that.
Oh, yeah.
He said a rushed bad deal would basically give the okay to dictators everywhere.
Seriously.
Her words were, it would embolden tyrants worldwide.
Wow.
She's not exaggerating.
Yeah.
This is a serious worry. If a big power like Russia can just change borders whenever they feel like it,
Right.
it sets a really dangerous precedent.
For sure.
And for Ukraine, it could mean losing land freedom, the chance to be their own country.
So we've got this potential power vacuum with the U.S. stepping back, European powers scrambling for influence, and Ukraine's future hanging in the balance.
And the stakes are huge. The next few months are going to be crucial.
Yeah.
They'll determine whether Europe can get past its own divisions and step up as a global force,
Right.
or if this is the start of a world that's even more divided and unstable.
Definitely. It's a lot to think about. But, as we go deeper into these sources, there's this one event that really stands out.
Oh, yeah.
It was like someone threw gasoline on a fire. It really shook Europe to its core.
You're talking about that statement from the U.S. Secretary of Defense?
Peter Hegseth?
Yeah, Peter Hegseth in Brussels.
Yeah, when he basically said the U.S. is no longer the guarantor of European security.
It was just one sentence.
Right.
But it completely flipped everything.
Decades of assumptions about the transatlantic relationship just gone.
Exactly. And it forced European leaders to face a really uncomfortable truth.
What's that?
They can't count on the U.S. anymore.
That's why Callas using that word appeasement is so important.
Right.
It shows they feel betrayed.
Yeah.
Like the U.S. is choosing Russia over its old allies.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
And some people are even saying that Trump's policies are being shaped by what Russia wants.
It's a controversial idea.
Yeah.
But there are definitely some similarities between what Trump says and what the Kremlin says.
Right.
It makes you wonder what's really driving this U.S. policy shift.
Yeah.
And if it's really in America's best interest.
So there's a lot of uncertainty and tension right now.
Yes.
But looking deeper into this stuff,
Yeah.
it's clear that this situation could also be good for Europe in some ways.
Oh, totally. This could be their chance.
Yeah.
To finally break free from the U.S. and become a real player on the world stage.
They've got the economy, the experience.
Yeah.
They could be a major force.
And some of these sources lay out potential paths forward.
Yes, yeah. Like what?
Increased defense spending, developing their own military capabilities, a more assertive foreign policy.
It's all on the table.
It is, but the question is,
Yeah.
can they get past their own internal divisions and seize the moment?
That's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it. So this whole strategically autonomous Europe thing,
Yeah.
what would that actually look like, in action?
Well, from what these sources are saying, it seems like
Yeah.
Europe would be less dependent on the U.S. for defense,
Uh-huh.
and more able to make their own decisions globally. It's kind of like they're,
Yeah.
graduating to a more independent role in the world.
That's interesting. So does that mean
Yeah.
like a total break from the U.S.?
Right.
Or just like a rebalancing of the relationship?
There are definitely a lot of different opinions on that.
Yep.
Some, like Friedrich Merz.
Oh, yeah. The guy who might be the next leader of Germany.
Right, exactly. He seems pretty ready to move away from NATO.
Really?
Yeah, he's even questioning if NATO will even be relevant anymore.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
Yeah, and it shows how a lot of people in Germany are feeling.
Like what?
Like they need to take control of their own future. They're tired of being seen as like the little brother to the U.S.
Yeah,
Especially when their interests don't align.
makes sense. But there are others,
Oh, yeah.
especially in the UK, who still see that partnership with the U.S. as super important.
Right.
They want to fix things,
Uh-huh.
rebuild that trust with the U.S. They see this whole thing as like a temporary bump in the road.
Right, not a complete break.
Exactly. It makes sense that some are hesitant to abandon such a long-standing alliance.
Yeah, for sure. But even those who are still committed to that transatlantic partnership, they're realizing that Europe needs to step up their defense game.
Yeah, I see that a lot in these sources.
Yeah, there's a ton of talk about increasing military spending, working together to develop new weapons, even the possibility of an independent EU army.
That would be huge.
Right, and one source even suggested this really cool idea.
Oh, what's that?
Boosting Ukraine's defense industry as part of this whole European rearmament thing.
Oh, that's
It was
interesting.
like a win-win,
Yeah.
It would help Ukraine defend itself, but also it would make the European defense industry more cooperative and integrated.
I like that. Imagine European countries pooling their resources and knowledge
Right.
to make cutting-edge military tech. It could change everything.
But strategic autonomy isn't just about weapons,
Right. It's about more than that.
It's about energy independence,
Yes.
economic resilience,
Uh-huh.
and presenting a united front in foreign policy.
You're totally right. For years, Europe has relied so heavily on Russian energy,
Yeah,
and this whole crisis has shown just how vulnerable that makes them.
for sure.
So to be truly autonomous, they need to diversify their energy sources, invest in renewable energy, strengthen their internal energy markets.
It's like breaking free from a bad relationship.
Exactly. And economically, they need to be able to withstand disruptions,
Right.
whether it's conflict sanctions or even climate change.
Yeah.
They need to diversify their supply chains, make their internal market stronger, and rely less on potentially hostile powers.
There's also a lot of talk in the sources about Europe needing to be more assertive.
Yeah,
About promoting their own interests and values on the world stage.
like they have the potential to be a leader, not just a follower.
Exactly, and that's a role they've been hesitant to take on in the past.
Yeah, they often just defer to the U.S.
Right, but with the U.S. stepping back from global leadership.
It creates this space for Europe to step in.
Right.
Imagine Europe as a champion for human rights democracy, a rules-based international order.
It's a pretty inspiring vision.
It is.
But it's also a huge challenge.
Yeah, one of the biggest obstacles, as we've seen, is their own internal divisions.
Europe has this long history of conflict and competing national interests.
It's like trying to herd cats.
Right.
Every country has their own priorities, their own baggage, their own economic concerns.
And the sources show how these differences have often prevented a unified European response to global crises.
Totally. We're even seeing it now.
Oh, yeah.
Some sources mentioned Italy being really skeptical about sending troops to Ukraine.
Really?
They say it's too complicated and their military's already stretched thin.
I see.
And Germany, even with all their economic power,
Yeah.
they're still struggling to get over their aversion to military intervention.
Right.
They're really hesitant to use military force.
Even to defend themselves or their allies?
It's a tough spot to be in. And then you've got countries like the Baltic states.
Right.
They're much more hawkish on Russia.
Yeah.
They want action now. They see every move Russia makes as a threat.
Uh-huh.
And they want a strong response from Europe.
So how do they bridge those gaps?
Right.
Find common ground, develop a cohesive foreign policy.
That's the key. If Europe wants to have real power and influence on the world stage...
It's a huge task, and it all comes back to that relationship with the U.S.
Yeah.
If Europe becomes more independent,
Yeah.
what happens to their partnership with the U.S.?
That's the big question. Some analysts think a more assertive Europe will inevitably lead to tension and competition with the U.S.
Oh, wow.
They argue that the U.S. won't tolerate a rival.
Right.
And that they'll try to stay on top, even if it means undermining Europe.
It's like sibling rivalry on a global scale.
Exactly. But others are more optimistic.
Okay.
They think a stronger, more capable Europe could actually be good for the U.S.
How so?
By sharing the burdens of global leadership.
Okay.
It would free up the U.S. to focus on other things. It could be a partnership of equals,
I like that.
each contributing their strengths to tackle shared challenges.
That sounds way better.
It does, but it requires trust and cooperation.
Right, and that seems to be in short supply right now.
You're right. It won't be easy.
Yeah.
Both sides will need to adapt and be willing to compromise.
Mm-hmm.
If they can do that, it could lead to a much more balanced and mutually beneficial relationship.
Yeah.
But if it's all mistrust and competition,
Right.
it could fracture the West even more,
Yeah.
making it weaker and less able to handle global threats.
And of course, we can't forget about Russia.
Oh yeah, the wild card.
How will they react to a more independent and assertive Europe?
It's a crucial question. Some analysts think Russia would see it as a chance to exploit divisions within Europe,
Oh, yeah.
using their economic leverage and energy resources to weaken Western unity.
Right.
They might try to pit countries against each other,
Mm-hmm.
offer good deals to some while punishing others.
Classic divide and conquered.
Exactly. But there's also the possibility that a more united and capable Europe could actually deter Russian aggression.
Interesting.
If Russia sees a strong, unified West
Yeah.
that's willing to stand up to them,
Uh-huh.
they might think twice about making any aggressive moves.
It's like they say strength and unity.
Exactly. But the key is for Europe to present a credible and unified front,
Right.
both in terms of military power and a consistent foreign policy.
That's the challenge, isn't it?
It is. Can they move past their historical divisions and national interests
Yeah.
to create a truly united Europe that can act decisively on the world stage?
Right.
The next few months will be telling.
So we've got a lot of potential scenarios, each with its own risks and opportunities.
It's like a high-stakes chess match.
Right.
Every move can change the whole game.
But it's not just a game.
No, it's not.
The decisions being made in Europe,
Yeah.
they'll have a real impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. Not just in Europe, but all over the world.
There's something these sources sometimes miss.
Yeah.
They focus on the politics and the strategy,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to remember the human side of all of this.
Totally. The sources do give us glimpses into the human cost of this conflict.
Oh, yeah.
One article talked about how the uncertainty about the war is affecting military recruitment in Ukraine.
Really?
Potential recruits are hesitant to sign up.
Why?
They're thinking if peace is coming, why risk their lives?
It's a good point.
It is. It reminds us that these geopolitical shifts aren't just abstract ideas.
Right.
They have real consequences for people on the ground.
And it shows how important it is to create a lasting peace.
Yeah.
One that addresses the root causes of the conflict and gives Ukraine a sense of security and stability.
Without that, it's hard to imagine a positive future for Ukraine and its people.
So we've talked about all this high-level stuff.
Yeah.
But why should the average person care?
Right.
How does this affect their everyday lives?
That's a great question, and it's one we're going to explore more in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll talk about what this situation could mean for everyday life, the global economy, and the future of international relations.
Okay, so we've talked about shifting alliances, potential conflicts, like even a potential new world order,
A lot.
But let's bring it back down to earth for a sec.
Okay.
How does this all actually affect the average person?
Right.
Why should they care about what's going on in Ukraine and all those high-level talks in Europe?
That's the real question, isn't it? It's easy to get lost in all the geopolitics,
Yeah.
But these things have real consequences for everyone, whether they realize it or not.
And these sources really highlight some of those consequences.
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about increased military spending across Europe.
Right.
So if countries are going to start pouring more money into defense,
Right.
Where's that money coming from?
That's the tough part, right? It could mean cuts to social programs, education, healthcare.
Yeah.
The things that really affect people's lives directly.
Right. Or they could raise taxes.
Which nobody ever wants.
And then there's the whole impact on the global economy.
Oh, yeah.
The war in Ukraine has already messed up supply chains.
Yeah.
And it's a big reason why energy prices are higher.
Right. If this conflict gets worse or just keeps dragging on,
Yeah.
those economic ripples could become a huge wave, affecting everyone.
Think about it. The price of gas, groceries, travel.
It could all be affected.
And for countries that are already struggling,
Yeah.
this could be the final straw. It really shows you how connected the world is.
Yeah, absolutely.
What happens in one place can have a huge impact everywhere.
Totally. And a lot of these sources are worried about this shift toward a might makes right mentality.
Oh, yeah. If powerful countries can just ignore the rules whenever they want.
Exactly. What does that mean for global stability?
It's not a pretty picture.
No, it's not.
If that becomes the norm, it could lead to even more conflicts.
Yeah, because countries will feel like they can use force to get what they want.
Right. International cooperation could just fall apart.
And we'd be left with a really dangerous situation where the strongest just make up the rules.
And it's not just about military conflict either.
No.
It undermines the whole idea of democracy and human rights.
Exactly. If powerful countries can act without consequences, who's going to stop them?
We could see more authoritarianism, weaker international institutions, less respect for human rights.
It's a scary thought.
It's a dangerous path that we need to be really careful about.
I agree.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all this, but,
Yeah.
what happens in Ukraine really matters for the whole world.
Ukraine's more than just a piece in a game,
Right.
It's a country with its own history, its own culture, people who deserve to choose their own future.
If Russia takes over,
It sends a really bad message to other countries facing similar threats.
it sets a dangerous precedent.
Totally. It tells the world that aggression works.
Right.
That you can just change borders by force.
It undermines national sovereignty and it emboldens other aggressors.
Exactly. And remember what Talis said.
About a bad deal for Ukraine.
Yeah, she said it would embolden tyrants worldwide. It's not just about Ukraine.
Right.
It's about defending democracy, freedom, self-determination everywhere.
So even if you don't think you're directly affected by the conflict in Ukraine right now,
Yeah.
this situation could change the whole world.
It really could.
It could decide if we live in a world with rules and cooperation or a world ruled by power and conflict.
That's a powerful way to put it.
It's a choice, and we all need to be paying attention.
I think these sources are a good place to start if you want to understand this whole situation.
Yeah.
They give you different perspectives, historical context, insights that can help you make sense of it all.
And as we keep following this story, I keep wondering about one thing.
What's that?
That Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome later this year.
Yeah.
Will it be a moment of unity and progress, or just another fight over what the future should look like?
That's a good question. We'll have to wait and see. But one thing's for sure.
What's that?
We're living through a really important time in history.
Yeah.
The choices we make now will affect the world for generations.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good.
But keep those sources coming.
Yeah.
We're here to help you make sense of this crazy world.
Absolutely.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
Great advice.